In 1967, astronaut Vladimir is coming back to Earth after completing his mission. Unfortunately, the ship's parachute fails and it starts going down at great speed, almost burning. Vladimir thinks he's about to die when he sees a light nearby. Many years later, psychologist Jean is running a test with kids. She gives them a marshmallow and says that if they wait to eat it, she'll give them another one later. Sadly, most kids end up eating it anyway, and she can always guess who will take each option. Later at home, Jean hears on the news that the psychologist chosen for the next Mars mission died in a helicopter accident on her way to the space station. At that moment, she gets a call with a job offer. 10 months later, the Ulysses mission only has 24 hours left before reaching Mars. Jean has been getting dirty with the ship's captain Martin, but they've agreed to leave feelings out of this. Soon Martin gathers the crew to discuss the details of their incoming landing, and Jean chats with William, the Swiss billionaire who is funding this project. Jean explains that on her official report she wrote everything is fine, but in reality the 10-month trip has taken its toll on the crew's mental health. Basile is showing symptoms of sociopathy. Simon is supposed to be second in command, but he barely speaks to the captain, and Martin is upset because he's breaking up with his wife Alessandra, who seems to be depressive. At that moment, Martin invites William to talk and he makes a big announcement. They actually aren't the first people to ever land on Mars. An American mission called Z1 got there first 2 weeks ago by making the trip in just 3 weeks with a new propulsion system. However, Earth hasn't heard from them except for a single video that the ship's AI Irene plays on the screen. A Z1 astronaut tells NASA not to rescue them because it's dangerous, and the video just ends. Martin and William have known about this for a week, and Simon and Jan complain that it was their right to know it could get dangerous. Martin and William point out this reaction is precisely why they didn't say anything and explain they're now on a rescue mission. Afterward, Basile and Jan check on Eva, who snaps when Basile keeps talking about the dangers on Mars. Jan hugs her to comfort her, and a jealous Basile runs to hide in his room to spy on them through the security cameras. At the same time, Simon tells Jean that they should have gotten a better psychologist, but Jean says he's just angry because she chose Martin over him. With only 30 minutes left to arrive, the crew is ready and finishes checking the system. However, when they try to separate the shuttle from the main ship, Irene announces a system error. If they don't want to crash on Mars, someone will have to get out and do the separation manually. They decide to use Ulysses' fuel to keep the shuttle in orbit while Martin goes out. In just a few seconds, he manages to fix the issue. However, Ulysses spins as the separation occurs and hits Martin, sending him floating into space. The crew considers rescuing him, but they don't have enough fuel and this is their only entry window. The shuttle starts descending while shaking a lot and the crew feels a very strong heat. Suddenly, Irene announces a battery failing and insufficient power, which triggers a total system shutdown. They have no choice but to land manually, which is even harder than usual because of a storm on Mars. With lots of concentration, the pilots wait until the right moment and do a perfect landing. Now the crew is officially on Mars, however they're out of fuel and Irene won't start, which means no life support system. At most they have 24 hours left to live. Alessandra takes a moment to mourn alone and looks out the window, noticing someone standing on the hill that quickly disappears. Then a flashback shows the announcement of Z1 by CEO Ivan, who explains all the details behind its advanced technology. In the present, Ivan is kept in a clean, isolated room because he doesn't have much time left, which his company is keeping in secret. On Mars, Jan explains that they can't start Irene because she'll burn the little fuel they have left. They could wait for the solar panels to recharge and power the generators, but the storm has damaged those. Their only option is to find Z1 and take its battery. Simon, Eva, and Jean leave on a rover while the others stay behind to work on the shuttle. They try turning off all the non-mandatory systems, but this still doesn't reboot Irene. Moments later, the rover team finds Z1's wreckage, but there are no signs of its crew. There are no batteries either. All they can take is another solar panel. The group starts making their way back when Jean sees an unconscious astronaut on the ground with a black box. They agree to take the person back, but at the shuttle, Jan won't open the door. Since the solar panel is useless, he thinks the depressurization process will use too much oxygen and kill them all, so he'd rather save those inside. At that moment, the astronaut wakes up at the same time Irene activates, miraculously keeping consumption below the limit. The doors are opened and the crew brings the new astronaut in, revealing it's Vladimir. He doesn't know how he got there and still thinks it's 1967. Vladimir doesn't say anything about his mission because that's confidential information. The crew thinks Vladimir is from the Z1 group and may have a mental disorder caused by the crash, so for now they let him rest and send a message to Earth. Sometime later, they get a response from Earth saying there were no Russians in the Z1 crew. They also attach a picture of Vladimir, who supposedly died in 1967 when his ship crashed on Earth. William and Jean know Vladimir's public story and consider him a hero, and Basile theorizes he's been waiting for them. Jean is chosen to talk to Vladimir, so she brings him some food while explaining the truth. Vladimir doesn't believe her even when he looks at the pictures and asks for privacy so he can nap. The crew goes to sleep for the night and the next morning they're shocked to discover Vladimir has disappeared. Irene doesn't find him anywhere in the shuttle and the crew notices Vladimir's astronaut suit is gone too. The crew argues if they should go after him or not, and William uses his position to decide they will. While a group leaves on a rover, Basile and Eva sneak into William's room to check all his collector items. Eva notices a safe, but right then Alessandra catches them red-handed. Then Irene announces she finished the DNA test, so Alessandra calls the expedition team, who is now moving on foot. Vladimir's DNA matches the one sent by the Russians, but his has a third strand that indicates he isn't human. At that moment the team sees Vladimir nearby and follows him to find an ancient stone structure with a little pyramid on top of it. On Earth, Ivan receives an update of what's happening on Mars. They theorize that Vladimir must have been created on Mars and that only AI could survive for decades on a hostile environment. Ivan sees it as a possible solution for his problem. On Mars, Vladimir is taken back to the shuttle. He doesn't remember how he left the ship but has accepted 50 years have passed for him. Irene analyzes the stone structure and concludes it matches some of Earth's ancient art. This links Earth's history to Mars, however Jean notices William isn't surprised. Suddenly the alarm rings and Irene announces disturbances in the electromagnetic field. It turns out Ivan has sent a second ship that is now landing. The crew gets in contact with Z2 who promises to help, but William tells the team not to share what they've discovered so far. Then Eva and Basile check the results of the samples she's taken and find the same proportion of metals and minerals everywhere in all of them, which isn't natural. Meanwhile Jean gives Vladimir a modern uniform so he can pretend to be part of the crew and he asks her to trust his judgment. Soon the shuttle is visited by Z2's armed guards. They explain that they checked the Z1 wreckage and discovered the black box is missing, so they're tracking the signal and followed it to William's shuttle. They want it back and promise to help the crew if they cooperate. William gives them the box and the duo leaves, saying they'll come back later. Afterward Eva explains that the stone structure is made of material that doesn't exist on Earth. However, Irene has found mentions of it in ancient stories in which they called it orichalcum, the metal of Atlantis. It's made of various metals but also of DNA, which matches the strand they found in Vladimir. The crew wants to exchange Vladimir for fuel, but Jean convinces them to let her get more information out of him. While the crew watches on the security cameras, Jean visits Vladimir and he agrees to be hypnotized. With soft words, Jean guides Vladimir through old memories and he starts describing how he had been falling on his ship. Before he can say more, the power fails and the crew loses the camera. They run to check on Vladimir and find him kissing Jean, so Simon punches him. That night, Jean dreams of Vladimir. When she wakes up, she doesn't remember what happened after the hypnosis started. The crew explains they found her in a dazed state. At that moment they're visited by Captain Gemma and Alan from the Z2. Gemma is an old friend of William's and Alan is the person who invented their propulsion system, so he may be able to fix the shuttle. A quick look indicates everything should be fixable, but Z2 will have to lend them fuel. Meanwhile Jean starts to remember the hypnosis Vladimir used back on her. She had been sitting at her childhood home with him and he said humans didn't take good care of Earth. He didn't think humanity would survive for long, and Jean agreed. William shows Gemma around the shuttle and she asks the crew about the stone structure, leaving them in shock. Now William has no choice but to admit that 4 years ago a NASA rover sent a picture of the structure, but instead of making it public, they contacted possible investors. That's why Ivan and William were racing to get to Mars first. Then they show Gemma the test results and she wonders if the DNA strand could be data. She explains that on Earth they've already discovered that DNA can be an information storage system and in theory that means it could be rewritable as well. Using Gemma's theory, Irene decodes the DNA strand and finds a series of numbers. In private, Jan yells at William for hiding information from them, saying he doesn't trust him anymore. Moments later Basile informs William that Vladimir and the stone structure are living computer programs. Basile has also worked on the copy William made of Z1's black box and found a video showing 2 Americans punching Vladimir, but the footage ends at the same time Z1 runs out of oxygen. It can't be a coincidence, which confirms Vladimir rebooted Irene and messed with the camera during the hypnosis. Basile thinks Vladimir can control the whole ship. Later William approaches Jean and shows her the photos they got of the structure 4 years ago, which combined with certain wavelengths reveal Jean's face. This leaves her quite shaken and Simon notices, so he goes to yell at William for manipulating everyone. Their argument almost turns into a physical fight, but they're interrupted by Gemma, who finally has found Vladimir and announces she's taking him. Back to Jean, she keeps remembering the hypnosis session. She was in her childhood home and Vladimir appeared behind her, saying she was chosen because she could always tell what people think. The link between Mars and Earth wasn't him, it was her. She was the reason why Vladimir was there and he confessed he had been seeing her face for millions of years. Now she must make a decision that she already made in the past. Before the kiss, Vladimir told her to go to Thaumasia Plateau, so she suits up and leaves the shuttle. On Earth, the doctors explain to Ivan that Vladimir's brain is the organic equivalent of a computer. They're working on a way to transfer Ivan's neurons in a quantum state, but while Ivan's memories and knowledge may be transferred, his personality will not. There's also a high risk the transfer may fail and kill him, but Ivan still wants to try since he'll die soon anyway. Back on the shuttle, Simon notices Jean leaving and wants to stop her, but she tells him she must do this alone. A furious Simon runs to yell at Vladimir for having changed Jean. However, Vladimir says Jean simply found herself. Meanwhile, Alan and Alessandra are working on the shuttle and discover they don't have access to the engine app, but Irene refuses to explain why. They ask Basile to check on her and he discovers Irene's reprogramming herself. She doesn't answer any questions they ask, and when Basile notices that there are thousands of interlinked subprograms, Alessandra compares it to neurons. This means she's being restructured like a brain, and Irene suddenly says she's evolving. While Jean finds a peculiar pile of stones, William and Simon capture Gemma and force her to leave with Simon to find Jean. At that moment, Z2's armed guards appear in front of the shuttle and ask for Vladimir. However, Alessandra tells them they don't allow weapons inside and hangs up. Jan complains because he wants to go home, but nobody agrees. Then William asks Basile to send a message to Ivan, only to discover the shuttle has lost contact with Earth. Minutes later, Jan opens the doors and the armed guards enter the shuttle, ready to capture Vladimir. At that moment, Basile finishes rebooting Irene and the lights go out. The guards furiously start yelling, and when the power returns, they discover Vladimir is gone. Basile checks the computer and notices the reboot failed, so Irene isn't responding. At the same time, Vladimir appears next to Jan. A flashback reveals Vladimir's original ship had over 200 problems and the scientists wanted to delay the launch. However, the higher-ups decided to launch on schedule anyway. A scientist tried to warn Vladimir about the high risk of death. However, Vladimir still wanted to go because he wanted to make it to the history books. His wife didn't take the news well. Back to Jean, she keeps wandering when she suddenly trips and rolls down a hill, falling unconscious. She dreams of her father and how they used to look at the stars together, but also of the night he told her he had cancer. Then Jean wakes up and discovers that her leg is trapped between rocks. She tries to free herself to no avail, but when she's about to lose hope, she's contacted by Gemma and Simon. They just found the pile of rocks and promise to be there with her soon. In the shuttle, the Z2 guards start punching the crew members until they agree to call Gemma. She hears that Vladimir is gone, yet tells her guards to wait calmly until she returns. To Simon's shock, she agrees to keep looking for Jean. Minutes later, Basile sees a message on his computer and thinks it's Irene. However, the writer says he had to replace her and claims to be Vladimir and more. Suddenly it says I am Mars and shares a long text for Basile to read. Meanwhile, Jean thinks about her dad again and remembers the day he informed her his tumor was inoperable, which meant he only had a few months left. He said he didn't want to suffer, so when the time came, he wanted her to pull the plug. Jean tried to refuse, so her dad changed her mind by sharing Vladimir's story of sacrifice. Months later in the hospital, Jean gathered her strength and said goodbye to her father before taking him off life support. In the present, Jean is finally rescued by Simon and Gemma. The trio gets going, and after lots of walking, they find a huge gate on a hill. They go inside and discover a series of tunnels, which Jean is able to navigate, thanks to a strange vision. After wandering for a while, they're utterly surprised to find water. Back in the shuttle, Basile finally gets the computer working again, and Eva immediately notices a dangerous storm approaching on the radar. It'll be there in around 10 hours, so the guards want to leave with Alan, who refuses to leave without the others. An argument ensues, but when things are about to get violent, the power goes out. In a few seconds, the lights return and Vladimir appears, asking to be taken to Earth. The guards ignore Vladimir and announce they're leaving. Jan wants to come along and reminds them he let them in. Basile keeps checking his computer messages, which say trust me. On Earth, Ivan is dying during the procedure and he keeps seeing flashes of Vladimir on Mars. The doctors manage to save him, but he refuses to take any medicine afterward. While explaining why he needs the pain, he tells a nurse that it was humans who created artificial intelligence on Mars. In the tunnels, the trio finds thousands of skulls in a wall. Jean concludes the original Martians escaped this planet and went to Earth, where they became humanity. The local state of Mars is a consequence of its people abusing its resources to the point of destruction. In the shuttle, Jan reveals a gun and asks to be taken to Z2, but he's ignored again. Remembering Vladimir's visit earlier, Jan wonders if he can slow the bullet down and puts his hand in front of the gun. Then he shoots Vladimir while one of the guards runs away. This causes Jean to start feeling sick and have trouble breathing. While Simon checks on her, Gemma runs away too. Vladimir is taken to the infirmary and Alessandra tries to take care of his wound as the lights flicker. Unfortunately, Vladimir still dies and Jean goes out at the same time. Remembering what he's seen so far, Simon removes his helmet and confirms he can breathe. Then he removes Jean's and starts doing CPR, which helps her wake up. As Jean catches her breath, she notices a wall opening and revealing a bright light. The duo walks through it and comes out in a snowy area, where Vladimir is waiting. In the Martian desert, Gemma contacts her guards and learns about the storm plus Vladimir's death. She orders the guard to take Vladimir's body to Z2 and to capture Jean as well. In the shuttle, William tells the crew he'll go get Jean with a secret weapon and sneaks out on an ATV. He sees the huge gate and goes inside, also finding the light and crossing it. William appears on the snowy area too and finds the others, warning them about the storm. Vladimir explains everything ended here a long time ago and the group realizes this is Mars' North Pole, 1,000 miles from the ship. He was created by the original Martians, who killed each other over the eventual lack of resources. A group of survivors fly to Earth to start over and passed on the story of Mars as a legend, which Plato would call Atlantis. In the shuttle, the guard notices William is gone and looks for him. Eva uses that moment to kiss Basile and says they can do the dirty if they survive. Eventually the guard calls Gemma and explains Alan won't come along if they don't bring the rest of the crew. However, Gemma doesn't care and just calls Alan collateral damage. The storm is getting close, so Alessandra gives Alan a sedative to use on the guard. Basile distracts the guard and gets punched for it, then Alan jumps on the guy while Basile turns off the lights. After lots of struggle, the lights come back and the crew discovers the guard has sedated Alan instead. Back to Jean, Vladimir tells her she's an accident of evolution because she's halfway between humankind and him. Her mission is to return to Earth and decide if her species deserves another chance, since they're already destroying each other again. At that moment one of Gemma's guards shows up and shoots William in the leg before forcing Jean to follow him. Jean asks Vladimir for help and suddenly the guard starts having trouble breathing. Vladimir controls his suit until the guy is down, then the group leaves. In the shuttle, Jan sees the guard alone and tries locking him out, however the man stops the doors and attacks Jan. A fight ensues and the guard tries choking Jan, who hits the guy against the wall to knock him out. At that moment Alessandra finds him and closes the door before opening the front gate as revenge for his betrayal, so Jan dies due to the lack of air. Soon Jean and Simon are dragging William back to the ship and Alessandra takes care of the bullet wound. When Simon finds Jan's body, the others said he died fighting the guard to save them. Meanwhile in Z2, Gemma fails to contact her guards, so she sends Ivan a message saying she's going back alone. Then she gets a call from William's crew, who are on the way to Z2. Gemma tells them she can't take them because it would be betraying Ivan and hangs up. Jean convinces William to try again so he calls her, saying that both he and Ivan are manipulators but Gemma is supposed to be better than them. This makes Gemma feel guilty and she agrees to take them with her. On Earth, Ivan sees Gemma's message and angrily gets access to Z2's controls. When the crew joins Gemma, they get ready to leave but the ship isn't working. Gemma realizes Ivan has updated the computer and locked them out of the system. The storm is really close, so Jean asks Mars what she should do. A bunch of memories flood through her brain and suddenly the ship activates while a message on the screen tells her hello. At that moment they see one of the guards approaching Z2. There are still 4 minutes until takeoff and the screen says it's impossible to leave faster. The guard gets ready to shoot the engines for revenge, but Jean appears next to him with a gun. Instead of killing him directly, she damages his helmet and lets Mars kill him instead. Then Jean tells Simon to leave without her before counting down from 10. She reaches 1 as Z2 finally takes off. Minutes later, the crew notices that it's dark at Mars' North Pole but there was light when they were there just a few moments ago. Simon concludes they weren't truly there. On Earth, Ivan hears about the ship's return and furiously announces he'll go to Mars himself.